Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. My name is Aisha Wang, and I'm a feature PM on the Auth Libraries team. So I'll be kicking off this call. So today we'll be talking about how some of our services are GA, and because of that, we have announced some end of support dates. But first, I wanted to kind of set the stage here and say that we're primarily focused today on talking about the Microsoft Identity Platform for devs. There's lots of great benefits into integrating with our environment, and we've created all of these tools and endpoints to make it a very seamless experience for you and any of your end users. In particular, my colleagues today will be talking about AAD Graph and MS Graph, and I will be talking about the authentication libraries. So the Microsoft authentication libraries are GA on a variety of platforms. As you can see here, the platform of your choice, we've probably got a library for it. The client libraries allow you to integrate into your app all of the sign-in experiences, token acquisitions, everything you would really need to be able to talk to the Microsoft services. Because we've announced GA for all of these, we wanted to say, hey, we are deprecating our older services. This is because we've made a lot of new security enhancements. There's a wide variety of new features in MSAL, and it's overall just a more stable build. So we wanted to make sure that we encourage people to say, hey, this is the latest innovation. This is where we have the most security and the most stability. And in order to do that, we want to be able to spend the time and resources on it. So we are shutting off support for AAD Graph. Your ADAL apps will continue to work after June 30th, 2022, but they will no longer receive security fixes and updates. So we definitely encourage you to check out the Microsoft authentication libraries. We've got a lot of docs and resources that can explain in a step-by-step way, hey, like if you have a certain scenario here in Android, we can help you migrate to MSAL Android. You can also tag us on Stack Overflow with ADAL deprecation, and we are happy to answer your questions there as well. So we really want to hear your feedback on what the differences between ADAL and MSAL are for your specific use cases, any questions you have, any feature requests. We're really excited to hear more from you, and we're excited to offer you the latest in innovation and security through the Microsoft authentication libraries. So with that, I believe I will turn it over to my colleagues.
So it's exciting to see some of the work that's happening in the MSAL space. That really is the best way for you to integrate authentication into your applications across a wide variety of platforms. And I appreciate Aisha introducing some of our timelines around deprecation. So I wanted to move the focus now from the identity libraries to the libraries that you use to manage your tenant. And historically, the APIs that we have provided for management of tenant have been AAD Graph. This is a pretty good API. In our estimation, it's RESTful. It is well fit to managing identity. However, there's a bigger opportunity when we look at the API space. So Microsoft is moving towards a platform with Microsoft 365 that integrates your workflows across multiple internal platforms, that allows you to create solutions that integrate Azure as well as Office in all of the different data and objects that live in these different places. And Microsoft Graph really is the foundational API for these experiences. And so it made a lot of sense for us to look at how we make sure Azure is exposed here, and especially your AAD tenant, how we integrate this into this broader Microsoft 365 platform. And the answer for that is to take the APIs that we had in AAD Graph and that functionality and expose that through the Microsoft Graph. And so really what we have now with Microsoft Graph is something that is beyond AAD Graph. So not only do we have full parity with all of the functionality that existed in AAD Graph, but you also now in the same API have access to file objects. to device objects, to security APIs, to reports, to mail, to calendar objects. And when you have all of these under one window, you have the ability to create these really rich solutions across all of these different platforms. And it's all under one API instead of having to jump different authentication mechanisms and different resources and different roles and groups. All of this is under one API. So some examples of that. This is one that I like here on the bottom, which is the department update scenario, right? Let's say that you have a situation where commonly in managing your tenant, you have folks who are switching departments. And normally this is a process that involves a lot of manual changes and working across different platforms in Office, and you've got to fix their Azure identities, and you've got to go figure out their device movement and all of those kinds of things. And now you could automate this all through the Microsoft Graph APIs. So you could say, okay, well, department update, we've got a number of personnel things that are going to change in Active Directory. And then we're going to go ahead and pull in the Office 365 groups and make sure that they're organized correctly there, as well as the groups and roles that are happening in your Azure tenant. And then we can go ahead and drop notes either in planners or through email notifications that these workflows have completed. And again, all of this is within the Microsoft Graph API. The other thing that we gain with Microsoft Graph, and this is really important for us, is this incredible platform breadth. So with AAD Graph, we had a REST API, which was great. REST is the common way for application development today, especially for web apps, is a good open standard. But there's a lot of overhead sometimes in writing directly to REST and coding directly to REST. And so what we have with Microsoft Graph is not only does it still have that same flexibility of being an open REST API, but we also now produce SDKs for a massive number of platforms, both inside Microsoft and outside Microsoft. And these SDKs are native to those platforms. They are generated every time the Microsoft Graph API is updated. And so you now have documentation SDKs, samples, all of these that are always up to date across all of these platforms for Microsoft Graph, making the integration much simpler. So I actually want to take a look at this really quick. And this is an example of documentation for the Microsoft Graph REST API. And the documentation itself, fairly straightforward. Here's the HTTP request that you've seen before. Where it gets interesting is here below. Now, for examples in our documentation, we have examples of how to use this in C#, of how to use this with the JavaScript, how to use it from our Objective-C SDK, how to use it from within Java. And in fact, we even have integration with the brand new Graph Explorer, which has been created for MS Graph and is maintained by the Microsoft Graph team. This is a tool which allows you to test these APIs and play with these APIs, and it's integrated right into the documentation. So if I run this here, I am going to get some demo gremlins, and that's okay. Let me show you the full experience here for Graph Explorer. So this recently GA'd, it's been in beta for a while. And you have the ability here to choose the version that you're using, to craft your URL, and to run those queries. So the last thing I want to...
Sorry, Nilesh is asking in the chat if this tool offer anything specific to Graph and better than Postman. And the answer is, so better than Postman, maybe not, because Postman is an all-purpose, a REST tool, but this is offer very specific API things to Microsoft Graph, and I will also show a little bit more example on that. And also Srini is asking if this works with Azure Government. Yes, we are in the government clouds. Graph is deployed there as well.
Oh, good questions. Yeah, if you're familiar with Postman and are comfortable with that, by all means, keep using it. Postman's a great tool. I also have Postman installed on my system right here, so you can see that. So the last thing I want to talk about ties back into the deprecation discussion. So as Aisha mentioned, we have announced that AAD Graph now has been superseded by Microsoft Graph. And so AAD Graph will be deprecated here in June 2022. So that's a little ways out. But now is the right time to start evaluating your applications and figuring out what needs to migrate and how. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you discover and migrate your applications. So right now we have the best way to find out if you have applications that are using AAD Graph is going to be in your app registration page inside your tenant. And so you see here, this is an application web app tutorial that has permissions to the Azure Active Directory Graph. And so we know that this is an application that is using AAD Graph. And in fact, you'll see the notification here up above that says this application is using Azure AD Graph. It's been deprecated, and we'll talk about that. There's another couple of ways that you can look for applications that are using AAD Graph. The main thing is that AAD Graph will always point to the graph.windows.net endpoint. And so you can look through your proxy traffic, or you can even just do a string search through your code and look for instances of graph.windows.net. Now, as far as migration, there's a forward-looking comment here that we are working on we'll call an API mapping table. We have something like this that we used internally in migrating the APIs from AAD Graph to MS Graph. And we are working on creating that documentation to share publicly so that it's easy to look at the AAD Graph calls you're making today and figure out what the equivalent Microsoft Graph call will be. In many cases, those mappings are fairly straightforward because Microsoft Graph is a superset of AAD Graph functionality. A lot of those APIs map across pretty clean. So that's it. We hope that you're able to take advantage of Microsoft Graph and recognize the opportunity as you migrate away from AAD Graph. And we hope that you'll reach out to us if you have any issues in this migration. Let us know how we can better support with tools and documentation to guide you through this. I want to hand off to Luca now, who's going to talk about one of the really cool things that is enabled by Microsoft Graph. Which is the ability to do powerful things now with your data in the APIs on top of Microsoft Graph.
Before that, there's a question for you in the chat from Anuj. Is when we expect the beta APIs to come as View 2? Because, for example, on the V1, the user object would return a limited result, and the beta is not recommended for production.
I may need to take this question more offline because the Microsoft Graph V1 is GA and it should have full parity with AAD Graph. If you are getting incomplete results, at this point that would be a bug, and we should file that bug and should work to close that bug.
So I think as incomplete result, it means as a limited result, it means that, for example, the user object shows by default less properties in the view 1.0 rather than in the beta endpoint, and this is by design. To specifically answer this question, usually the APIs that are arriving in beta will move to the v1.0 endpoint after roughly 90 days. And this varies a lot between APIs. So take this, 90 days as not a specific number, but as a tentative date for the teams to release to production. So we know that we don't recommend using beta in production because APIs can change and we don't want to break your apps. Everything is in the 1.0 endpoint would definitely be stable. So I hope I answered your question.
We can also dig in a little bit on that API. Some of the changes in Microsoft Graph as we get into versioning involve attributes that are not returned by default, but attributes that have to be specifically queried for. So I don't know if extension attribute for users fits in that category. That's another thing we can look at. It's a good question.
Oh, there is another question.
Let's see. Question: on behalf of OAuth grant, when will it be supported on B2C? I'm not sure if I understand that question yet. So yeah, I can follow up with you offline.
Okay. So we actually already presented this topic in one of the previous calls, and this is a refresh with a spin on developer experience. So back in April, we announced the build new capabilities for Microsoft Graph for AAD. And these new capabilities add new way to query all the objects that you can see in the slides. And we also provided some new links to query these objects. There is a link of a blog post of the announcement, and I will invite you to check it out to gather more information about this. But for now, let's see a super quick start on how you can use these new capabilities using the Graph Explorer. So this is my demo tenant in Azure portal, and I connected my Graph Explorer with my account. And if you have an Active Directory, you can log in with your Active Directory. And if you have the right permission, you can query your directory data with Microsoft Graph. So the first thing to do in Graph Explorer to use these new capabilities is to select the beta endpoint. Yes, we are still in beta, but we will announce soon the move to the v1.0. And another important thing to remember is that if you want to use all these new capabilities, you need to add the request header called consistency level and set the value to eventual. This is because all of these API are only supporting eventual consistencies. And as you know, AAD as a distributed system replicate the data in multiple servers. And this replication occurred in like a bit of time, like 2-3 minutes. And all of the new capabilities that we offer that are filter and search and order are on a separate server that maintains all these indexes. And so these indexes are updated a little bit later than when the directory change happened. So for example, if you add a new user and then you want to query the count of all the users that you have, you might see that this number here is not updated immediately, but it will be in a couple of minutes on average. So now, since this is a developer call, let's get some code. It's an application, very, very simple application that I created that basically replicates what you see in the Graph Explorer. And I choose .NET Core as a language, but of course this can be replicated in any language that you saw in the previous slide presented by Rick. So let's see one very first example. So if I run this, I'll use my Graph client to get all the users, and I can also add a few filters over here. And then I'll display the result in the data grid that you see over here. So in this case, you can see that all the users in my tenant that were here are displayed in this list. I can also, for example, sort those users, like doing the order by clause. please. And now, of course, you will see all the users sorted by display name. One thing, though, that is not supported currently in the 1.0 endpoint, and it's not supported if you don't add those consistency level header and the count parameter, is filter and order by at the same time. So if I want to, for example, see all the user that starts with conf to get all the conf room. In this case, I would need to put display name and then starts with the name conf. Now I will get an error because sorting and filtering at the same time is not supported. But using the new capabilities, I can do exactly that. How you add all the parameters that I showed before. Adding the eventual consistency header that I define over here. This is just a new header option. And this is replicating what I'm doing over here, adding this header. And adding also the count to my request. So adding the count that is just a new, another query string parameter is required for most of these queries. So I suggest to always add it because it really doesn't hurt. So in this case, I run the example again. My users are sorted. Now I can also filter. So this it works perfectly. And as you can see here, we also have this OData count that results from the directory. So count is very important because it would show you the subset of the results that you filtered on. And this also includes everything in your directory, meaning if you have thousands of users, when you query graph, you will have a paginated result. And if you just rely on the count of the request, so let's, for example, put little breakpoint here and add this top 10 to simulate the pagination. You can see that my result has only 10 with the count property. But if I look inside additional data and I extract the real count of my result, I see that I have 34 users. So that's why it's so important, because it would not consider the pagination, but the full count of your users. Another thing you can do in Graph, other than having this OData count over here, is to get the row count. Get the row count is as simple as adding a new part on the string. The results would not be JSON; it would just be a single number with the number of objects that you were querying. And this, of course, can be combined with search, can be combined with other filters, etc. Let's see how we would do that. Close here, and let's open this. The row count is a little bit more complicated because it's not currently supported out of the box from this API. First of all, I need to get my users and append a new segment to the request URL. And in this case, it's count. After that, I'll get my filters if I want and extract the request message and manually send this request message and then manually parse the response over here. If I run this, I will have my user count variable with just the raw number of count, exactly like in my Graph Explorer. So what we can do next? Another thing that is super interesting is to use the OData cast. So as you know, if we try to get the members of a group or from a user to see what are you member of, the types of data can be different. So in a group, you can have users, you can have devices, you can have applications. And there is a way now to filter down those types to a specific one. So if I want to get only the members of a group, I can that are type user, I can do that using OData count with a query similar to this. So if I get the groups here, I have all my groups, and then I can get one of the first group we have over here. I'll get the ID, and then I call transitive members. It's a new link that will give you the results of every members in this group, even if the groups are nested. So we have two properties. One called members that will give you only the direct members, and transitive members that will also result with the members. So Reniel is asking if will be support for select on this one. Of course, select is always supported in everywhere. Okay, now you see that we have here some users. Probably my demo time and it is not very it's very useful to see, but if I do this, I'll get this Microsoft Graph user. Right now, I only have all the users in this group and not also the device for application. Let's see how to do this in .NET. So now I'm actually, in this example, I'm doing the member of. That means that from a user, I want to see all the groups the user is a member of. So it's basically the inverse. But OData cast is it's used the same. Okay. So when I run this and I double click on the ID of a user, breakpoint, new, okay. And I click one of these. Oh, I should also remove the top 10. Okay. And I double click, for example, Pari. Now I'll see all the groups that Pari is member of. And this is quite simple to implement. I still have to separate my request URL from the actual request that I sent over in this case. Add a segment of the data cast, and then add my options for the data count, and then basically get the request. And in this case, you'll see all the groups. So again, this is not supported in the API directly, but by using this trick and separating the request, you can still get your result. So let's load this again, and I want to show you some new items, some new filters that we implemented. So thanks to the new advanced query capabilities, now we have the not equal filter, and I can, for example, exclude some of the user over here. If I now load, you see the count decreased and ADAL went away. Or I can also add an ends with filter that was previously not supported. Now it's supported for mail and user principal name in order to get the domain. So I added myself as a guest user, and you can now filter by basically domain if you use this end switch on the mail or user principal name. And this is my demo. If you want the source code, I can provide that. And all the rest of the capabilities were described in one of the previous session, and Stephen can link you to that. Stephen?
Yes, everyone. Does anybody have any questions for any other presenters today? Yes, we can provide a link to the code. We'll do it in the description of the YouTube video when we post it. You can go to the YouTube channel, which I believe is on the next slide. There you go. So if you go to aka.ms/m365dev YouTube, there's an identity playlist there, and you'll see previous videos, and this video will be posted there as well. So if there are no other questions, I will thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and have a great weekend, everyone.